So with everything happening in our country and in our world right now, I sometimes wish that at any minute, some sparkling lady is going to come along and tell me that I can click my heels 3 times and I'll go home to a simpler, safer existence. And that I'll wake up and I'll realize that it's all been a dream or a fever-induced hallucination. Does anyone else here like The Wizard of Oz? I mean, The Wizard of Oz, come on, who doesn't like The Wizard of Oz in some ways? One thing that I loved about The Wizard of Oz when I was a child was that good and evil were clear, right? Which made, there was Glenda, the good witch, and then there was the Wicked Witch of the West. And this made it easy to root for the good ones and to root against the bad ones. That if real life were so simple and straightforward. The musical, and now the Hollywood blockbuster, Wicked, tells a story in a much more complicated way. It claims to be the backstory behind The Wizard of Oz, and it turns out that the good witch ain't so good, and the bad witch, well, apparently she's not so bad. We discover, as we often do in life, that those who rise to prominence and to popularity are not necessarily as virtuous as they often appear. And those who are demonized by society are sometimes the true heroes. The women who fought for equal rights in this nation were initially seen as gadflies and troublemakers, uppity women who didn't know their place. It's the story of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., Karen Silkwood, Muhammad Ali, vilified for standing up, or in one case for sitting down. It's the story of Stonewall, and it's the story of Greenwood here in Tulsa. The story of 1921 in Tulsa, and for decades afterward, was that upstarts in the black community rioted and caused their own destruction. The story was that white Tulsans were being threatened by the unruly mob, who the society deems the good ones and the bad ones is often not the whole story. When we look at real life, there's often a trade-off between popularity and integrity. It's something that you and I and everyone struggles with at some point in our lives. In Wicked, we find out that Glenda, the good witch, and Elphaba, the wicked one, were roommates in college and were friends. After graduation, when they both sought out a government job with the wizard, they both learned that their government and its leader, the wizard, were not as virtuous as they had imagined. Glenda, the blonde-haired, gorgeous, popular one, decided to accept the government job anyway, despite the moral compromises that it requires. In essence, she chose social climbing and economic advancement over her values. And because she did, she retained and expanded her popularity and her reputation as the good one, the successful one. On the other hand, Elphaba, who had never been popular and who wanted nothing more than to make her family proud and to earn the love of her father and of the wizard, turned down the position. She gave up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to finally be accepted and honored by her family and by her community. It was right there at her fingertips. She had wanted it all her life. She'd worked hard to achieve it, and now it was being handed to her. It was a moment of truth. It was a point of reckoning. Should she compromise her values and attain success and recognition, she could easily rationalize it, as we all sometimes do. She could say, This is just the way it is. The world is unfair. And this is the cost of getting ahead. Success, we're told, requires compromises. And anyway, everyone does it. Can't the ends justify the means? She could take the job and then work from the inside to make a difference. She could make the money doing something that, yeah, she doesn't really believe in, but then use the money to do good things. There are 1,001 rationalizations that must have haunted her decision. Especially because not to accept the offer of the wizard was to defy him. It was to make her an enemy of the state and unpatriotic. And she'd be slain in the media and deemed a terrorist. You see, Elphaba was born with green skin, if you haven't seen the show. She was different from the moment she was born. People projected onto her difference that she's scary and something's wrong with her. Defying the wizard would prove everyone's suspicions were correct. That her difference is indeed a sign of her depravity. And it would prove that people are right to fear someone like her. There were plenty of reasons to just go along and not rock the boat. But Elphaba chose her morals over her success. And she does so at great cost. Now, as viewers, we're reminded that things are not always as they seem. Good and evil, as defined by society, is not so simplistic. And when we see stories like this, we love it. When we eat up movies and novels and real-life stories of people who risk losing what's most precious to them to do what's right. Something happens in our hearts when we witness such an act of courage and integrity. And we wonder, would I have the character and the fortitude to do the same if I were confronted with such a dilemma? Now, when I look at the span of my own life, there have been times when I have taken the cowardly path, when I've chosen to stay silent, when my words could have mattered and made a difference. I'm not proud of it, but I know that it's easy and it's tempting to do it when you're right there in the midst of one of these moments. There have been times in my life, especially when I was younger, when I failed to speak up and I was afraid to stand out. You may know, I've talked about it from time to time, that I'm half Jewish on my father's side of the family. It's an important part of my heritage, and my grandparents and my relatives on that side of my family mean a great deal to me. But because I was not raised Jewish, and I don't have a recognizably Jewish name, in many instances, my Jewish background is invisible. So I've been in conversations and in circles where I've heard anti-Semitic comments or other slurs and insults about Jews or a particular Jewish person. And throughout my life, there have been numerous times, and it breaks my heart to admit it, but I was not as admirable as Queen Esther in the Bible. If you know her story, she famously came out of the closet as Jewish to save her people at great risk to her life and her reputation. And there have been times in my life when I stayed under the radar, not admitting my background, and not even challenging such comments in order to be accepted, and not lose my standing in the group. Every time I did, it ate away a piece of my soul. I felt a sting inside and only realized later that the sting that I felt was a kind of acid that was eating away a piece of my soul. Now, I know how it feels to discount my values and to let my pride and ambitions caused me to choose the path of least resistance and therefore to compromise my integrity. And I suspect you do too. So I'm not going to demonize Glenda too much because I understand the temptation and the seductiveness of such a path. I also know that outward success amidst inward indignity and compromise feels awful. To be held up as a hero or exemplar outside while feeling like a phony on the inside is a kind of inner death, a corrosion of the soul. Yet it's not easy to be alive without compromising our convictions sometimes. It can sometimes be a matter of keeping a job or being able to put food on the table. For most of us, there are times when we've come so far at something and the goals that we've been working for are so close at hand, so attainable, and we found ourselves trying to weigh the significance of achievement against the compromise that it will require. I read a book by the minister Andy Stanley, in which he explained that the quickest path between where we are and where we want to go is rarely the ethical path. His experience helped him realize that if a person is willing to compromise their values, that they can often get ahead much faster. He explained that whatever path you're on, there will be moments when you're faced with the challenge of choosing expediency at the expense of your values. In his book, The Next Generation Leadership, he writes, "You will be tempted to believe your ends justify the means. But there will be another voice as well. The message will be simple, short, and without explanation. This is wrong." And against this still small voice of conscience, you'll hurl 1,000 reasons and explanations and rationalizations and illustrations, but when you're finished, the undaunted voice inside of you will continue to whisper, "It's not right." And you'll discover that leading with character will often jeopardize your forward motion. He said, it's only when doing what is right will impede forward motion that you discover if you're a leader worth following. Now, I saw this with my late colleague, Bishop Carlton Pearson, who was one of the most gifted and successful evangelical Pentecostal preachers of his generation. He achieved success that only 0.01% of ministers ever achieve. He was counsel to a number of United States presidents. He was respected by Christians all over the world. He had fame and fortune and a huge following. And he was determined, when he finally determined that his teachings were no longer what he believed, he risked all of it to maintain his integrity. And we see it in politicians like Liz Cheney. Now, she's someone I disagree with on almost every political issue. However, when she faced a moment of truth, when her forward motion as one of the most successful and promising politicians in her party was put in peril by acting with integrity, she chose character and doing what she believed to be right over her success and ambitions. It's only when doing what is right will impede forward motion that you discover if you are a leader worth following. The straight path to our goal is usually not the honorable path. And the popular position is often not the virtuous position, at least not at first. Nobody worth listening to argues anymore that slavery is okay, or that women should not have the right to vote, or that people should not marry or hire or serve people of other races. But the folks who initially took these positions against inequality were often demonized and ostracized. People lost jobs and lost elections and lost friends. Yet they did what they believed was right regardless of the cost. The right path is often not the easy path. The purpose of life is to live a life of purpose. And that's why true happiness comes from living lives of courage and of meaning, and not from prestige and popularity and profit. We each stand before the wizard. Every time we hear a racist joke or a sexist comment or a homophobic or an Islamophobic or an anti-Semitic comment, and we let it go unchallenged. We stand before the wizard when we decide to wear a rainbow pin or put a bumper sticker on our car that expresses some position or value that we hold dear, or in a social media post. It's the dilemma of the whistleblower, of every person who confronts their boss or quits their job over principle. It's every transgender person who's willing to face the ridicule and the loss of status that often comes with living their truth. It's you and me. Every day. At work, at home, at school, in the locker room, in the voting booth. A very wise person said to me once that what defines us and makes us human, is that we have the ability to forego our own self-interest for a greater good. And that's why corporations cannot be people. Because they're ethically and legally bound not to go against their own self-interest. Now, the Unitarian side of our tradition has long stressed salvation by character. They have said that we are saved or made whole, not by what we believe, but by the virtue of how we act. And I agree that character and our actions are much more important than our beliefs. But because I'm also often imperfect, and the world is incredibly complicated, I'm also glad that our tradition includes the Universalists, who are known for forgiveness and for the hopeful message that we are loved even though we sometimes fail and fall short. So I'm going to keep striving to be a person of strong character, even though I know that the path from here to there is much like the yellow brick road. It's a windy, circuitous path filled with all kinds of funky people and situations. But when I come to the end of my days, I want to feel that I've done what's right, even when it was hard. How about you?